Hi there. Welcome to Theology Thursday. Over the years, the number one question that I have gotten from people has changed. For a long time, the number one question I got was, what kind of Bible should I get? Either for themselves, a child, a spouse. For Christmas, I want to get my daughter a new Bible kind of thing. And so I would get that kind of question. And then over the years, that's kind of changed now with, the ability just to pull out your phone and pretty much access any translation. That's not as necessary and significant a thing as maybe it used to be. However, one question that I have gotten quite a bit in recent years is one that I want to address today. That is the question of cremation. Now, historically, certainly in the Western world, really around the world, people have buried their dead. Now, the way they do that varies from culture to culture. Some cultures, they would burn dead bodies. But for the most part, around the world, historically, people have been buried. And in the United States, that traditionally was the way that was done. We'd have cemeteries, and you would erect a headstone with the name of the person, the year they were born, the year they passed away, sometimes the very dates that they were born and passed away. And then sometimes a saying that they had, or a Bible verse, or maybe a picture. I've seen headstones of guys shooting deer. You know what was important to them. Headstones sometimes of maybe a little angel or something if it was a child. So lots of different ways that we've done it traditionally. However, in recent years, the cost of a funeral has escalated dramatically. The cost of a cemetery plot has escalated dramatically. And so financially, that's led a lot of people to seriously consider cremation. As a matter of fact, a lot of cemeteries now have like a memorial wall where someone can be cremated and then the urn or the box with the ashes is placed inside of a slot in the wall, and then there's a cover put on with a nameplate so that you can go and say, here's where grandma's buried, so to speak. So you can still have a place to go and remember the person. So I want to talk about cremation from a Christian perspective and just note a few things for us today to maybe help give some clarity to this subject if you have wondered about it or if some of your loved ones are considering it. Cremation of someone who has died is not really directly addressed in the Bible. There are references to what they did with dead people. If someone died and you prepped the body and all, then you were considered unclean. But the reality is the Bible doesn't directly speak to burial or cremation or, something else with the body. I mean, it doesn't really address it. So therefore, we must build our idea of cremation from some of the things that the Bible says a little more indirectly. And there are some things to note that have been said indirectly. So, 1 Samuel 31, we find the first cremation, and this is of Saul, and they take their bodies and they cremated them. However, in that passage, the reason they cremated them was because their bodies had been mutilated by the Philistines, Saul and his sons. And so this is the first cremation, but it's not really like we think of as cremation. It's a very unique kind of situation where they're in some ways trying to preserve a body that has been severely mutilated. Another thing they would do at Old Testament times was they would exhume. They would take the bones of deceased kings and bring them out and would burn them. This really is not cremation. This is someone who has decomposed except for their bones, and they're burning the bones as a sign of disrespect, to intentionally be disrespectful to a former king. They don't really do this for people in the Bible, like just average citizens. It's pretty much reserved almost exclusively for people who were kings, royalty. And again, it was a sign of humiliation and was intentionally designed to do that. In 2 Kings 23:15, which I think we got here. Yes, 2 Kings 23:15 and following, we find a description of Josiah. He burned dead human bones on the altar to make the altar unclean. Again, this was not for or against cremation. It was specifically done to make this pagan altar unclean so that it could never be used again. And that was the purpose in that passage. Let's talk about what they did in the Bible, and then let's talk about whether or not then cremation is acceptable, because the reality is those are the only couple of passages that we have about anybody's, really their bodies being burned, outside of burning your child in the fire as a human sacrifice, and we know that really has nothing to do with cremation because that's someone who's alive, and that is a very vile and abominable practice to God and should be to us as well. In Bible times, they buried, but not like we do. They didn't dig a hole and place the body down inside the ground. Instead, because Israel is very, very rocky, what they would do in the land of Israel, even down well into New Testament times, is they would take a cave, and oftentimes they would enlarge the cave, and inside they would cut slots. So what they would do is they would cover the body in cloth and put a lot of spices and things on it to help cover the odor of the decomposing body, and would place those in the slots. Now, over time, the body would decompose. Once it had decomposed down to just the bones, in a very dry, arid climate, when you're inside of a cave where you don't have worms and dirt and soil and moisture and things, now the bones would last a long, long, long time. So they would place those bones into a box called an ossuary or a bone box. And sometimes they were ornate, sometimes they're very simple with just the name of the person, and they would stack those in the back of the cave. And so the slots in the front of the cave were for the more recently deceased family members, and then the ones in the back would be those that died sometimes even decades or centuries before, and they're just stacks of boxes with the bones inside of them and the names of the person whose bones are in there. Now we know that Joseph of Arimathea had started a new tomb. Whether he wanted to start a new family one or whether his old one was getting full of bone boxes, we don't know. But he dug out a new cave, a new tomb, and that's where Jesus was laid, was inside that tomb. And they did not put him in a slot in the wall. They probably just laid him on the ground, or maybe there's a little shelf in there, because they needed to come back after the Sabbath and finish preparing the body, which basically meant putting a bunch of perfume on the body, for lack of a better description, so that the odor from the decomposing body would not just really be bad. As a matter of fact, if you bury a body in the dirt, you just put a body in the dirt, in average, it's been studied that in average soil, it takes about 20 years for the entire body, bones and all, to decompose. Sometimes maybe a little faster, oftentimes slower because not all soil is average. So we're looking at 20-something years, maybe 30 or 40 or even 50. Still, it decomposes into absolutely, there's nothing that remains. The way we do them, where they embalm the body and pump it full of chemicals and put it inside of a sealed casket, inside of a sealed vault, that body's going to last forever. And in many ways, it's actually unnatural and nothing like what they did in biblical times. So I want to look at a couple of passages now that talk about the body and the burial and all that sort of thing. So in Psalm 103, verses 15 and 16, we read, "As for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field, for the wind passes over it and it is gone, and its place knows it no more." Now, this is a reference to the fact that the grass and flowers disappear and the body disappears. It's gone. And so they understood this, that they didn't go to extreme measures to attempt to preserve the body. The Egyptians did of their kings. They embalmed them, but the Hebrews did nothing of the sort. Now, what that verse tells us, and there's a similar verse in Isaiah, what that reminds us is that burial and cremation have absolutely nothing to do with our hope in the resurrection. We do not believe that the body is going to be resurrected from the ground. We believe that a new body will come from the ground. I will not have the same body. I'll have a new body that's designed to dwell with God forever in heaven. Paul goes to the lengthy description of this in 1 Corinthians 15, and we won't cover all that. So whether you're buried or cremated doesn't make any difference. It doesn't speak for or against our belief in the resurrection because we don't believe in the resurrection of the body. We believe in a bodily resurrection. It will be a body, but it will be a new body designed for heaven. meaning that people who have lost limbs or people that were born with physical special needs and what have you are not going to spend forever eternity with an arm missing or forever blind or deaf. The deaf will hear, the blind will see, the lame will walk. We'll have a new body, not the same body. So disappearing, like it describes in Psalm 103, is really had anything to do with that. As a matter of fact, it doesn't matter where the body is. It doesn't matter what happens to the body. God will resurrect a new body. So here's what we find in Revelation chapter 20. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. So even those that were lost at sea or in the military and their body was put over the side of the ship into the water, God can do it. God can give you a new body, whether it's been buried, burned, or laid to rest at sea. God can handle it. So actually the Bible really does not speak for or against cremation. What we do with the body should be something that we do out of respect and dignity, but really the Bible doesn't address the issue of cremation, so it is okay if you want to be cremated. But I do want to lay out just a couple of kind of practical things here. First of all, for some people, cremation is a challenge because there's no place to go visit. When we go back to our hometown, we can go to a cemetery and we can see like where my grandparents are buried. I have a cousin who died as a teenager. He's there. Aunts, uncles, my parents will be buried there. We can go to another cemetery where Jerry's dad is buried. So we can go and visit the place, and it just kind of in some ways gives us a connection to the person that we loved and cared about. So there are some things you can do with cremation along the same line. I've already mentioned that a lot of cemeteries now have a place for people to put the ashes like into a memorial wall so that you can go and visit them. You can always keep the ashes in an urn in the house or someplace if you want. You may scatter the ashes in a place that's important to them, and so you can go to that place and remember them, how important it was to them. As a matter of fact, that's the plan for me, is that I'll be cremated and my family will go to the trailhead and say goodbye to my ashes, and a couple of my buddies will mountain bike my ashes out to the roller coasters on Hawes Loop, which is my favorite section of mountain bike trail in the world, and they'll spread my ashes out there because it's just a place I love to go. The other option, I guess, would be the Grand Canyon because I love to go hike there, but Hawes Loop roller coasters is the plan. So my family could always go out there, even just like to the trailhead, and say, the mountain biking was something our dad really loved, and his ashes are spread on his favorite trail, and just kind of feel that connection again to me. So there are some things you can do to kind of have a place to visit, so to speak. Maybe not the exact spot, but in this area out here, and so you can do that. Now, there is one angle to cremation that most people don't think about. The Bible may not say much about burial and cremation, but I can tell you it says a lot about stewardship and about how we handle our resources. The reality is cremation is far, far less expensive. When funerals are sometimes $10,000 or more, and if you count the cost of a cemetery plot and all, it can get quite exorbitant. Whereas you can do a cremation for $1,500, $2,000, and so it's far more affordable. And so there is a stewardship element that in some ways cremation, at least in our current world, is being a better steward of the financial resources that God has given, plus being stewards of the land that we have. For a long time, people just buried in a hill on the back of the family property, and eventually that would be bought out or abandoned or whatever. And people don't even know where they were buried. Like, there's nothing left there; it's all been decomposed. Now, with the way they embalm the bodies, not so much. That space is taken up, really, in a sense, forever. And so, being good stewards of space, being good stewards of money, creation for many people is really a better alternative than burial. So I hope that this helps you a little bit. Again, the Bible doesn't speak directly to cremation or burial. It certainly does speak that we honor those who have gone before us, and we want to treat them with dignity and respect. But however you choose to have it done, or however your family chooses it done, whether by burial or cremation, all of those are acceptable to the Bible, and certainly they make no difference when it comes to the resurrection and we have a new body. So God bless you. And let me just say this: the most important thing is not how you're buried or cremated. The most important thing is, where are you when your life is over? And if you know Jesus, you know that you're in heaven. And if your loved ones know Jesus, you know they're in heaven, whether they've been buried or cremated. And that really is the most important question. Have a great day.